Welcome to Worship Tutorials.
Hello, salutations.
We have new patches and presets for you today for the Line 6 Helix, the Line 6 HX Stomp,
Heyo,
Fractal Axe-FX 3, and FM9.
We got some explaining to do.
How many people do you know that show number 4 like this?
One.
This started as sort of a thought experiment that Bradford and I had about, like, let's take some of our most popular patches that we made like years ago for Helix and for the Fractal platforms.
It's been that long. We can say years.
Yeah. Most of them started as a single amp with all of the wet effects, reverbs, and delays after the amp, post-amp. We have been doing stuff lately more in a pedalboard into an amp type of a situation, which is actually like all of the tones that we're emulating, like, you know, Hillsong, Bethel, Elevation. That's how most of those guys are running their rigs, is effects into amps.
So a lot of them are starting to use modelers.
They sure are. So we've been doing presets lately. Like the last one we released was based on the Dreamweaver. It was all the wet effects into the amp. So
into the front.
We thought, and it sounds different. It's really cool. It sounds different. It's sort of a preference thing. You might
totally a preference.
Before or after. It makes the reverbs and delays sound a lot different.
So different. I was wondering how long it take Brian to catch on to what I was doing.
Oh, I immediately knew what you were doing. Just trying to make a video here. So we really feel like we've gotten a lot better at setting these presets up with the effects into the amps.
You have to do different stuff. You can't just like, oh, I want it before.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that.
Because reasons.
The idea is we'll take some of our best-selling patches, best-sounding patches that we made initially for these hardware units, and build them in a effects into stereo amps setup. So that's what you've got. This is the Matchless DC-30. It is 2 instances of it in all of these platforms. So Helix has 2 amp models, Fractal, same thing. And then they're in stereo, and then all of the wet effects are in front of it.
Which is why we can't do it for FM3.
Yes.
It wouldn't be in stereo. Or Podgo. Whole... Definitely not Podgo. At least with FM3, you could do it, but it'd be mono.
You could do mono. You could do it on Podgo too. You could do mono wet effects into the amp.
Yeah,
it's not quite the same thing.
It's not quite the same thing.
And in that situation, I would prefer to run stereo effects after the amp.
Yeah,
and I think most people would. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's only for Helix, Stomp, Axe-Fx, FM9. All right, let's talk about some of the differences when you're running wet effects in front of the amp. One is how they sound. Mm-hmm. Another big one is gain staging.
Yeah.
So in a lot of our presets, we have buttons set up to turn the gain on the amp up, right?
The most transparent drive.
That's right. Gain that thing up. So you can't really do that in this scenario because you're changing the gain stage after all of your wet effects. So it basically takes your reverb levels and delay levels, and it just goes like this.
When the amp is gained up and wet effects are going into it, there's none of that headroom. So like it basically just like that's the best way to do it is just like the wet effects, the level of them do come up, but especially on delays. It sounds like the mix gets cranked up a lot. And it almost is like because of the... It just
doesn't sound right.
Yeah, and because of the way the amp is compressing to do that, yes, the digital amps compress. They do it right.
They do emulate their real-world counterparts as they are designed to.
Because that happens, your repeats on the delays also trail off a lot slower. It takes longer for them to dip. After the amp, you have to mix the wet effects higher because there's nothing to like push them and drive them. Before the amp, you have to turn it down because of that headroom.
Mix levels, yeah.
Yeah, you got to turn the mix levels down because of that, the way the compression. And so what sounds so good, and which this is why like I love running my pedalboard into a Kemper, is I like how you're not going to have this real pristine, uniform trail off of your wet effects. You dig in on maybe on a certain note too when you're playing. Like you don't always, especially live, you're not always going to hit the notes with the same intensity. Mm-hmm. So you're going to hit one note with some extra, as you were saying earlier, some extra English. And
put a little mustard on it.
A little extra English. And like
the color of Nick's shirt.
The wet effects are just going to they're just going to spit in this really cool.
Yeah, they get a little gnarly. Well, they
magical.
Distort.
Yeah, they distort. And it's in all the good ways. Mm-hmm. So if you really like that pristine thing,
you don't want this patch.
This may not be for you. That's why there's sound samples because, and we try to
you can
really
very
showcase
clearly
that.
Hear that sound.
Yeah,
it's cool.
They just and like you can't get. There's certain characteristics of reverb into the front of the amp. A lot of times, I think when people are saying, "Hey, I want this sound of reverb," there are times where it's a very specific instance, but also a very general way of describing this instance. I don't think people realize that, like,
It's
yes,
the placement of it.
the wet effects in the front of the amp. I know there's certain modelers people like where they prefer just reverb after because of the way that, like, the pedal and the amp in the box kind of sound things, take things. But I'm so passionate about this.
It's like all the other presets you get from us. You can run them sort of in stomp box mode or snapshot or scene mode where you have access to those things. We have per preset mapping custom in all the Fractal
Yes, that's a whole other animal.
The README files have all the information you want to know. We have included scenes and snapshots for lots of different sounds that you can get for combining all the different effects together. Of course, you can build your own to suit your preferences. The Helix and the Stomp patch come with our own custom-made impulse responses. One of the Matchless tweaked G12H30 Celestion that is in the Matchless cab that we have. The other is a Celestion Blue from our Vox AC30. If you have any questions about this, let us know. If you're using this patch and you love it, tell us about it in the comments. If you don't love it, keep your mouth shut.
You can write a review on Yelp.
All right. Subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more patches in the making, like that are ready to go. We just got to make videos and release them. There's some good stuff coming.
You don't want us to finish all the patches before we release because that'll take forever. You want us to do it this way, I promise.
Yes. Subscribe so you don't miss it. See you in the next one.
Turn on notifications.
Bye.